The night sky over Israel was supposed to be controlled, calculated, protected. Then Iran's missiles came through anyway. In Tel Aviv, one failed interception turned into something even more terrifying when a cluster warhead missile split open above the city and scattered bomblets into civilian neighborhoods. An elderly couple in their 70s was killed inside their apartment by a single submunition. One of Tel Aviv's main train stations was damaged. In Haifa, strikes hit electrical infrastructure linked to a major refinery complex, showing that this was not just a symbolic barrage meant to make noise on television. It was a message written in fire. Iran can still put Israeli cities, infrastructure, and daily life directly in the crosshairs. And for a country that built its security doctrine around stopping threats before they land, that changes the meaning of the war instantly. What makes this moment so dangerous is not just the damage. It is what the damage reveals. Israel's air defense network is one of the most sophisticated on Earth, built layer by layer for decades, and yet officials have still acknowledged that the shield has not been airtight. Reuters reported Israeli officials describing an interception rate of roughly 80 to 90%, which sounds overwhelming until you realize what the remaining 10 or 20% means when hundreds of missiles are in the air. BBC reporting says Iran has fired around 400 missiles toward Israel since the current war phase began on 28 February. Even a small fraction getting through is enough to turn apartment blocks into rubble, train stations into impact sites, and entire cities into siren-driven battle zones. That is the brutal mathematics of saturation warfare. You do not need every missile to hit. You only need enough to prove that the shield leaks. And once a population starts to believe that, every siren becomes psychological warfare before it becomes anything else. To understand why Tel Aviv and Haifa are now taking direct fire from Iran, you have to go back long before this latest exchange. The hostility did not begin with one missile launch or one airstrike. It began with the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when Tehran's new Islamic regime turned opposition to Israel into doctrine. It deepened in Lebanon in the early 1980s, when Iran's Revolutionary Guards helped create Hezbollah, the most dangerous anti-Israel force on Israel's northern front for decades. It spread into bombings, covert operations, and foreign battlefields, from Argentina in the 1990s to Syria later on. Then came the nuclear file. In 2002, revelations about Iran's secret uranium enrichment work intensified Israeli fears that Tehran was moving toward a weapons capability. In 2010, the Stuxnet cyber attack, widely believed to have been developed by the United States and Israel, struck Iran's Natanz facility and opened a new era of invisible war. For years, the conflict lived in the shadows: sabotage, assassinations, cyber war, proxy militias, deniable attacks. But shadow wars have a habit of becoming real wars once both sides decide the old rules are no longer enough. That threshold was crossed in a historic way in April 2024. After a suspected Israeli strike on the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus killed senior Revolutionary Guards officers, Iran responded with an unprecedented direct attack on Israeli territory. For the first time, the taboo was broken openly. Iran launched drones and missiles at Israel in a move that signaled something much bigger than revenge. It was Tehran declaring that the old model of fighting only through proxies could no longer guarantee deterrence. Israel answered with a calibrated strike on Iranian soil days later, and the region entered a new era. Reuters later described that moment as the point when decades of shadow war began hardening into open warfare. At the same time, Reuters reported that U.S. military planning was suddenly being tested in real time. Washington had helped blunt that attack, but officials were already warning that stopping one barrage was not the same as being prepared for a prolonged regional war. That warning now looks less like theory and more like prophecy. Then came the next major break, in June 2025, when Israel launched what it called Operation Rising Lion. Reuters reported that Israel struck Iranian nuclear infrastructure, missile factories, commanders, and scientists in a surprise attack that killed top figures, including Revolutionary Guards commander Hossein Salami, and pushed the conflict into a much larger air war. Netanyahu said the operation could set back Iran's nuclear program by years and warned that what Iran had felt so far was nothing compared with what was still coming. Tehran answered with ballistic missiles and drones. Reuters reported that at least 17 strikes evaded interceptors in the opening retaliation, including impacts around Tel Aviv, killing at least 3 people and injuring many more. At the same time, Israel expanded its target set, and for the first time in that phase, Iranian energy infrastructure was hit, including South Pars, the world's largest gas field. Suddenly, this was no longer just a conflict about deterrence or prestige. It was about survival, strategic depth, energy leverage, and the ability of each side to keep the other under constant pressure. The shadow war had not just ended, it had exploded. And this is where the missile story becomes far more important than the dramatic footage alone. Iran is not only launching missiles at Israel, it is adapting the way those missiles work. Reuters reported that about half of the missiles fired in the current war phase after the joint U.S.-Israeli attack on 28 February carried cluster warheads. According to Israeli military officials cited by Reuters, these warheads can split apart at an altitude of 7 to 10 kilometers and scatter roughly 24 sub-munitions, each carrying 2 to 5 kilograms of explosives. That means one incoming missile can become dozens of separate threats over a wide urban area. It also explains why defense experts say they must be intercepted above the atmosphere if possible. Because once the cluster payload disperses, you can no longer stop the bomblets in any clean or centralized way. This is not just a military tactic. It is a strategy designed to stretch defenses, multiply panic, and turn one successful penetration into many impact points. In simple terms, Iran is not just trying to hit Israel. It is trying to overwhelm the geometry of Israel's protection system itself. That protection system is formidable, but even the best architecture has weak points under pressure. Israel's long-range Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 systems are designed to intercept ballistic missiles, with Arrow 3 intended to engage them outside the atmosphere. David's Sling covers the middle tier against heavier rockets, cruise missiles, and some ballistic threats. Iron Dome handles shorter-range rockets, mortars, and drones. The U.S. has also reinforced the shield with THAAD, while American ground systems and even a U.S. Navy destroyer have reportedly helped shoot down incoming missiles. Jordan has intercepted threats crossing its airspace. On paper, it sounds like an almost impenetrable wall. In practice, it is a race of speed, altitude, stockpiles, and probability. And when interceptions happen, the danger does not always disappear. Reuters reported that massive fragments of Iranian ballistic missiles, sometimes 4 to 5 meters long, have been falling across Israel and the occupied West Bank after being struck in the air. In other words, even successful defense can rain war back onto the ground below. Haifa, in that sense, is one of the most revealing targets in the entire war. Tehran is not choosing it by accident. Haifa is a port city, an industrial hub, a northern gateway, and home to critical energy infrastructure. Reuters reported that in June 2025, Israel's Haifa-based Bazan Group shut down all refinery facilities after an Iranian attack damaged its power station and killed 3 employees. In the latest 2026 reporting, Reuters said Iranian strikes caused localized hits at the Haifa complex, damaging electrical infrastructure tied to a service facility and causing temporary power disruption, even though the damage was described as limited and most production was still operating. The signal is unmistakable. Iran wants to show it can threaten not just Israeli civilians, but also the logistical and economic arteries that keep Israel functioning in war. A missile that lands in Haifa is not merely an explosion. It is a warning that the battlefield now includes ports, grids, fuel, and the industrial skeleton beneath the state. Yet the other side of this story is just as important, because Iran's missile salvos are happening while Israel is showing striking dominance in the air. Reuters reported in June 2025 that Israeli officials declared air superiority over Iran, with Netanyahu calling that control a game changer. Analysts told Reuters that Israeli warplanes were operating with extraordinary freedom, refueling over Syria, destroying Iranian air defense batteries and striking nuclear sites, missile stockpiles, commanders, and scientists. Israeli intelligence penetration was described as astonishing. But then comes the strategic twist that changes everything. Tactical success is not the same as strategic victory. Reuters reported that even with air superiority, Israel would struggle to deliver a knockout blow against Iran's deepest underground nuclear facilities without U.S. bombers and powerful bunker-busting weapons. Fordo, in particular, has long symbolized that limit. So Israel can dominate skies and still fail to fully remove the underground core of the Iranian problem. And Iran, even while losing launchers and air defenses, can still fire enough missiles to put Tel Aviv and Haifa under pressure. That is why this war feels so dangerous. Both sides can hurt each other deeply, but neither side can easily finish the other. The region around them is being pulled in as well. BBC reporting describes Iranian strikes and threats extending well beyond Israel, touching Gulf states, shipping lanes, and regional energy infrastructure. After Israeli strikes on South Pars, Iran targeted facilities in the Gulf, including reported damage at Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial zone, while also escalating threats around the Strait of Hormuz. BBC also noted the strategic vulnerability of desalination plants across the Gulf, where modern cities depend on seawater turned into drinking water. At the same time, Hezbollah re-entered the picture from Lebanon, and Israel intensified strikes there too. This matters because once energy routes, desalination systems, and shipping choke points are openly discussed as targets, the war stops being a local duel and starts becoming a global economic threat. Oil prices, maritime insurance, electricity supply, shipping confidence, and regional military deployments all begin to move with every missile exchange. That is how a strike on Haifa or Tel Aviv stops being only an Israeli story and becomes a test of how much instability the wider system can absorb. And maybe that is the deepest secret hidden inside the images of shattered buildings and falling debris. This war is not only about who can hit harder, it is about whose theory of deterrence survives. For years, Israel believed that superior intelligence, preemption, air dominance, and layered missile defense could keep existential threats manageable. Iran believed that distance, proxies, missile stockpiles, underground facilities, and strategic patience would preserve its ability to retaliate and endure. What Tel Aviv and Haifa show is that both theories are cracking at the same time. Iran has proved it can still punch through and punish Israel's home front. Israel has proved it can penetrate Iranian airspace, decapitate leadership, and damage critical programs. The United States has proved it can help shape the battlefield, but not necessarily control the political consequences once open war begins. This is why the conflict feels so unstable, not because one side is clearly winning, but because both sides are demonstrating enough capability to keep escalation alive while failing to create a clean path to ending it. So when those missiles smashed into Tel Aviv and Haifa, the real shock was not only the fireball, the shattered glass, or the screaming sirens. The real shock was the message buried underneath them. The old boundaries are gone. The shadow war is over. The proxies are no longer enough. The missiles are now writing strategy directly onto city streets. And if both Iran and Israel continue proving that they can absorb pain, adapt, and strike again, then the next phase of this conflict may not be decided by who launches first, but by who finally realizes that every new limited strike is building a war neither side will be able to contain.